wanted to also, Katie, I want to thank Katie in the back for all of her help in setting up, and she made those delicious cookies out in the back, and hope everyone get a taste, and just done a lot of preparation the last couple of days. We had a great event yesterday in Mobile. And I'm going to read the author's note first, and that will give folks, it's a short couple of pages, just to give you a sense of what this album and multimedia event is, and then I'll talk a little bit more about it. And just for a sense for the day, I'm gonna read some stories, and it's starting to read. I'm gonna read some stories, and followed by Lizzie's gonna play the corresponding song, and then at the end, Liz is going to play a few more songs, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. Author's note: music is the mystic, and song my spirituality. I never considered myself a musician. My only musical claim to fame was playing the snare drum and a bagpipe band. I continue to struggle to learn how to play the guitar, as Chris knows very well. But I always loved to tell a story through song lyrics. I realized over the last 2 decades I have written about many of my extraordinary life experiences, not in prose, but through lyrics. For a long time I was incapable of fully describing these pivotal life moments, despite the enormous impact they had upon me. I was reluctant to share these events, even with close friends and family. I was unable to express in words, written or verbally, what had happened. Lyrics bridge that ineffability gap. Adhering to the song verse-chorus template and imposing a rhyme scheme helped me focus my thoughts. Crafting words to song was my first step in processing and understanding what was happening before me and within me. My journey of understanding began a year before the COVID-19 pandemic struck the international community. My quest continued through the pandemic's course when I turned inward. That time of relative isolation and uncertainty provided vast context to some of the concepts I was trying to come to terms with. The physical, emotional, and spiritual spectrums converging in me. As I continue to practice my writing lyrics to help me process my personal awakening, I embarked on a parallel track of extensive journaling and writing, and later researching to shed light on what was unfolding. Along the way, I began to find my spirituality and better understand my true self. The essays that follow describe travel off the beaten path, openness and possibilities, deep friendship, collective emotion, death, grief, self-discovery, mindfulness, presence, intuition, and personal transformation. The significant moments described in the coming pages are accompanied by corresponding song lyrics. In some instances, the lyrics have been developed fully into songs in collaboration with seasoned songwriters. Songs are sprinkled throughout these pages with links to the audio. Many of the songs are included in the Free Now album. The album we created was pure magic. It moved many listeners, friends, family, neighbors, radio station DJs, and other musicians and complete strangers. Listeners were intrigued by the characters and the lyrics and the emotion of the music, melodies, and vocals. In some cases, they were moved to tears. They wanted to know if the stories and characters described within the songs were real. The intrigue, emotion, and interest of the listeners motivated me to write this book. Woven into the chapters is the influence of living on a small farm in the southwest corner of the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. Raising livestock and growing fruits and vegetables on the fields and harvesting firewood in the forest has deeply influenced my writing and the evolution of my spirituality. My deep connection to this land and my sense of place within it set the stage for many of the song lyrics. The convergence of emotion, nature, and music shared by like-minded souls is my sweet spot, and where all the magic happens. The following pages describe some of my extraordinary life experiences without the assistance of AI. I have to put that in there. We all have such experiences, each unique and yet universal. I'm reminded of the adage, write what you know. The following pages describe just that, what I know. Jim Ryan, Bear Swamp Farm, Vermont. With that, I was going to introduce Lizzie, and you guys are in for a treat with Lizzie. And I met. Oh, okay. Sure.
Volume.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah. Lizzie and I met at a songwriting class at the Summit School in Montpelier. 15 years ago, maybe. Something like that, facilitated by Colin McCaffrey, and I knew I wanted to collaborate with Lizzie when I first heard her voice, beautiful voice, and Colin felt the same way and suggested that Lizzie record some of her original songs, and in his studio called The Green Room, and her first album was a brilliant success. She won Singer-Songwriter of the Year and Best Album of the Year in Vermont for that year. And two of the songs that you're going to hear tonight we collaborated on, Saline Skies and Judavine, and on that album. And then we followed up about 10 years later with the Free Now album, and Lizzie and I wrote 6 songs together on that album. Dave Keller and Colin McCaffrey and Carly Harvey are also collaborated with me on the songs and recorded and performed the song. But with that, Lizzie Mandel.
This is called Freedom.
This is called Freedom.
Finally free now, free to choose your way. Every day is different, you would always say. Jump boulder to boulder, a bright new dawn to your day. Already a new way, untied and free to soar. It came on so suddenly, bright new day at your doors. A misty connection like you've never seen before. But you're not sure what the future holds, and you're not worried one bit, 'cause you're just a passenger on this wild and winding trail. You're not sure what the future holds, and you're not worried one bit. Someone else is driving on this wild and winding trip. You worship the sun now, she has slayed your dark night. You lay down your armor, surrendered without a fight. You open your heart now and let in all the light. You don't seem to sleep much, can't manage to sit still. You seem so happy, now you're all fulfilled. Determined and driven to build that house up on the hill. You're not sure what the future holds, but you're not worried one bit.
Judavine, Bear Swamp Farm, Vermont. I maneuvered down 4 rut-filled miles of muddy gravel road north of Wolcott Village, famous, or better, infamous, for Buck's Furniture cluster of drab, dark brown buildings. Each time I journeyed past the hill farm nestled above the large swamp complex to help my friend Nancy with her maple sugaring operation, I was struck by this place that seemed frozen in time. For me, this place, now my farmstead, and its immediate surroundings always looked inviting and intriguing. It was the early aughts when I asked Nancy who lived there. I wanted to know the farmer's story, how they made their living, what their lives were like. Nancy said it was the Colgrove farm, Frank and Eva's place. Frank had passed away in 2001 at the age of 93, but Eva, then in her late 80s, was still living there on her own. Nancy and her ex-husband had befriended Frank and Eva and sugared on the land once owned by the mentoring couple. After Nancy's divorce, I helped her cut trees and limbs and shovel snow off sugaring lines, repairing down lines and tap trees on snowshoes. Inside the sugar house, we were bathed by an endless steam billow, trying to escape through the siding gaps and cupola, while the condensate clung to the metal roof and dripped upon the heads of those inside. Work was often tedious and yet rewarding. Hours were spent feeding sugar wood to the hungry evaporator at regular intervals. Simultaneously, we checked sap levels, temperature, density, and apron sheeting, awaiting the magical moment when sap becomes syrup. At the end of the season, we cleaned the tubing lines. Eva and Frank's old school bucket system with sap collected by draft horses was replaced with tubing lines, a vacuum system, and later high-tech reverse osmosis. There's something to be said for keeping things simple and as quiet as possible in the woods. A few years into my stint as Nancy's helper, I was driving by the old Colgrove place and noticed the hill farm looked uninhabited. A new realtor sign adorned the front yard. I asked Nancy where Eva Colgrove was. She said her daughters decided to move her to a nearby nursing home. The daughters were concerned after a chimney fire because Eva continued to run the wood stove. Eva wanted to stay at the farm, but her daughters decided the move was in Eva's best interest, both for her safety and their convenience. Although tinged with sorrow for Eva, this felt like an intervention from the universe, discovering that my dream farm, the homestead paradise I admired for years, was now for sale. It was love at first sight. I felt this instantaneous and deep connection to this land and its setting, as I first sat on the top of the hill directly behind the house with the sweeping view of the property. The homestead was nestled in its own little valley, Judavine Mountain and the ledges to the east looking down on a small farmhouse, which was surrounded by a large tamarack and speckled alder wetland. Balsam firs encircled the swamp, with red maples directly behind. Deeper within the mix was a mix of northern hardwood, spruce, and hemlock trees. The scene conveyed a bucolic and boreal feel at the same time. It was quite the juxtaposition: rugged ledge exposed mountains, wild-looking swampland, and an island of fertile farmland, prime agricultural soils. In Vermont, it's rare to see these habitat combinations in the same location. It was quiet, other than the sounds of nature in spring. The farm and surrounding lands provided ideal feeding and cover habitat for waterfowl, deer, moose, mink, bear, beaver, songbirds, coyote, fox, fisher cat, weasels, woodchucks, porcupines, skunks, and raccoons. Many of these species would later provide unique challenges for our small farmstead. A half-dozen 100-year-old apple trees shaded the backyard, and at the end of the row of apple trees radiated the hallelujah crown of a big-toothed aspen and 2 larger-than-life balsam firs which stood guard in the front horseshoe drive. The landscape I learned was called Bear Swamp, or known by its fictional name, Judavine. The late David Budbill and his wife Lois lived in the next house up the road. Budbill, a well-respected author and poet, described Bear Swamp as great and remote. wild and lonely, and declared the Colgrove Farm one of the most beautiful places on earth. I couldn't agree more. The landscape inspired many of David's plays, poems, and works of fiction as he wrote from his home office, looking out the windows. The Budbills would later become good friends as well as neighbors. The winter cold stubbornly lingered into late April, like a tenant refusing to leave after being served an eviction notice. Northern Vermont was clobbered by a major snowstorm in the last week of April. Snow clung heavily to the ground, nearly reaching the top of the picnic table in the backyard when I decided to move into my new home. As I was overseeing the construction of the farmhouse, the unseasonably cold and snowy April transitioned to a more welcoming mid-May. The amphibians began to return on what I later learned was a regular schedule. It was rare to see them, but their calls resonated in our natural amphitheater, filling the evening air. First, there were the raspy quacking sounds of wood frogs, followed shortly thereafter by the high-pitched chorus of spring peepers, and then the trills of tree frogs as spring progressed. During the day, the deep booming and gulping sound marked the arrival of our regular spring and summer resident bird, the American bittern. At about the same time as the bittern's arrival comes the unique sounding bobolink, which nests in the pastures adjacent to our farmhouse. I described their mid-air flight sound to friends as like an analog reel-to-reel recorder being rewound or fast-forwarded, an audio ecstasy. I've come to regularly anticipate the coming of nature's chorus as it serenades me while I undertake the demanding to-do list of homesteading in spring, and always keep my bedroom window open, allowing the nocturnal spring to lull me to sleep. I recall as a child trying to arrive at a place I would now call transcendence, when I wandered off into the woods behind my house to explore and sit for hours. When I was growing up, I was unaware of terms such as mindfulness, being present, or meditation. I did not understand at the time why I needed my alone time, only that when I was able to bask in solitude, I felt so much better. My natural surroundings embraced and welcomed me. I often took off my shoes to feel the forest floor on my bare feet, grounding myself to it. I stared for long minutes at the treetops swaying in the light wind and the blue sky, and felt the crisp air on my face. It seemed even then, when I had my alone time in the forest, I could come back and face the world refreshed and in a better state of mind. Yes, I was truly an introvert, but it was more than that. An extroverted person needs companionship to recharge. Being alone was not only how I recharged, but was also, and still is, part of my spirituality. The outdoors was my church, and I required regular worship. It was my first feeling of sense of place and a connection to a particular natural place. Little did I know I was already beginning to explore what changing my level of consciousness felt like, induced purely by the natural world, state of mind, setting the stage for being able to fully engage in future lucid experiences. To me, sense of place is a deep, heartfelt connection to a particular landscape and the people who inhabit that landscape. It is about the feeling that that land creates for me. It is rekindled each time I reconnect with that space and those people. It does not necessarily mean the place is home, but it can feel like home. Sense of place is not always a solitary endeavor for me. When like-minded individuals with a common connection to a landscape gather, a collective emotional shift can occur. A kindred group can feel the power of their surroundings and experience deep presence. Sense of place is the intersection of nature, culture, and consciousness shift to being fully present in that place. Sense of place is the comfort I feel when I walk or ski in the forests and fields of my farm.
It's called Judith. softly fades. Keepers sing their serenade. A flock of geese flying overhead. Moons are nesting in their beds. I'm hoping I might find a sign that'll lead me there to Judavine. I've been outside fighting this cold. This is spring, so I'm told, and I am chilled down to the bone. I need the warmth of a hearth and home. Tell me how long till I find my way to divine. The moon hangs low in a starry night. It led me here to a brand new life. And their swamp soothes my wandering soul. A put down roots growing old. Down the hollow and open sky, I found my home. Judavine. Down the hollow and open sky, I found my home. Judavine.
That was the first song we collaborated on.
First song.
Written on the house.
Lizzie came up to our house or our farm, and we had a rough draft of the lyrics and felt inspired looking out the window. And Lizzie's back staying with us for the weekend. Glad to have her back.
Yeah.
My new old friend, Bear Swamp Farm, Vermont. Eva smiled broadly when I entered the room. She shared her space with her new roommate, Doris, who became her best friend. I found them in their common space, sitting next to each other in adjoining chairs, holding hands. She requested that the nursing home attendants bring me dinner as she was served her meal. There was no use in declining her generous offer. Eva can no longer cook. She can at least visit with me over food. Eva preferred to sit on the top of her walker when I visited. She joked that she still had her cat Buster with her. Buster initially came with her to the nursing home. Eva proceeded to lift the walker seat to show me her cat's ashes contained in the pet urn beneath. Eva and Frank stopped milking cows in the late 80s, but raised beef cows and maintained a giant vegetable garden out back for many more years. Eva was known by all the neighbors for her home cooking, baking, and canning all sorts of vegetables and meats. There was never a short visit when guests stopped by at Eva's place, especially after Frank died about a decade prior at age of 93. Eva insisted her visitors stay for lunch, or at least a piece of her legendary homemade apple pie with apples from trees out back and crust made from the lard rendered from their own pigs. She often convinced her guests to take on some sort of small, minor repair home improvement project. Visitors were more than willing to help Eva so she can continue to stay in the house. When cleaning out and renovating the house, I unearthed a half dozen musty photo albums buried in an old kitchen cabinet underneath dusty boxes and ancient, poorly maintained farm equipment in the garage. Within the sticky pages of weathered albums were photos of Frank tilling soils with a one-bottom plow hitched to their draft horse, and maple sugaring with buckets hung on trees. Photos of bountiful garden harvests, and images of boisterous card playing at the kitchen table with neighbors. Once a week, I took a break as general contractor overseeing the complete gutting and renovation of the farmhouse, and took one photo album with me to the nursing home. Eva pointed out the characters in each photo as best she could remember. She was mentally astute for the most part, with occasional lapses in memory, especially when viewing the newer photographs. Her recall was better in remembering her childhood and early days at the farm. I peppered her with questions about how she farmed, her enormous vegetable garden, canning, how many cows she milked, and how they ran their maple sugaring operation, hauling buckets to a wagon and then drawn to the evaporator by horse. We would often laugh at her farm stories, Frank's sense of humor, and her love of farm living. She lived on the farm for most of her life. I would share my house construction stories with her. She perked up in excitement thinking about all the renovations to her former home, many of the improvements that she and Frank dreamed about but couldn't afford. After I purchased my first greenhouse, I brought her tomatoes and salt. The nursing home limited her salt intake. I was smuggling in contraband. Katie moved in with me about a year after I purchased Eva's place. I brought Katie with me to visit Eva on several occasions. Katie and I were big hits with Eva and her elderly neighbors. Soon Eva would insist I give her a big kiss on the lips when I was leaving. She told me that she loved me. It was not what stoic New England small dairy farmers were known for. One day I made calls to the nursing home and Eva's daughter in Florida and asked if it was okay to take Eva on a little field trip. They both replied with enthusiastic yeses and thought it would be uplifting for Eva. It was about a year and a half after I purchased the farm, and the first phase of renovations was complete. I wanted Eva to see the house and farm again. I picked Eva up at the nursing home and drove her to the farm. When we arrived, I helped Eva up the 3 steps on the front porch. She was in awe of all the work we had done. Eva's tiny galley kitchen was now more than double in size, both laterally and vertically. A vaulted pine ceiling hung above with new granite kitchen counters and hickory cabinets. A store display unit I purchased for half price. Part of my role as general contractor was construction and material clearance sale scavenger. While touring around the first floor of the house, she gazed at the maple flooring unearthed from the ugly linoleum and the new wide pine, maple, and ash flooring in the kitchen and bedroom with a sense of pleasant surprise. I had cut, milled, planed, and joined most of these boards with friends, Kevin. Kevin was one of my friends, from my forest in Washington, Vermont, and transported them back to my new home. For some reason, when Eva and Frank were living in the home, a previous renovation included replacing the original farmhouse windows with fewer and smaller windows. I installed larger windows facing south, which illuminated the entire house. Her eyes popped open with admiration of her completely refurbished home. I assisted her back into the vehicle, but this time we headed off with my Ford 150 four-wheel drive farm pickup truck. We were off for a cruise around the old farmstead. I took her to the top of the hill behind the house to get a panoramic view of the farm and the bucolic valley it sits in. The same view where I fell in love with the farm on one of my first walks on the land. The place had me in an instant, and Eva seemed to share my sentiment as we sat in the pickup truck looking out. Eva looked down at the back garden, tilled and full of vegetables, just as she had always done. She looked across the road to see the new greenhouse I constructed there. Now home to tomatoes in the summer and winter greens in the colder months. I was putting up cedar post fencing, preparing for the arrival of beef cows. Another nod to Eva that I planned on continuing farming the land. Eva said, "Wow," several times as she beamed at the thought that a recently abandoned farm was being cared for and would continue with its new owners. Eva was glad to be back home and see all the work we were doing. She seemed reluctant to return to the nursing home when we came back in the house. She lingered in the kitchen. She inhaled the newness, and then as we slowly headed out the door onto the porch, her eyes swept around the farm, mountains, and pastoral fields, as if taking it in for one last time, which unfortunately it was. The smile slowly left her face when she knew I would have to bring her back as nighttime began to fall, casting its shadow on Judavine Mountain. Part of me wanted to adopt Eva on the spot, so she can return to her home. I helped Eva get into the car. As we pulled down the driveway, she looked over her shoulder with a sense of pride at the farm she and Eva lived in and loved for so many decades, now in my hands to continue. She gently touched my arm and said, "Thank you," as we took the gravel road back to the nursing home. Katie and I still live in the old Colgrove farm, which we renamed Bear Swamp Farm. We cut, split, and stack our own firewood from the same woodlot that Frank worked across the swamp. We grow vegetables in our unheated greenhouses, as well as the same garden out back where Eva tended her vegetables. We have 100 blueberry bushes and a dozen beef cows graze our pastures. We sell some of these foods to the local food co-op and our neighbors, but mostly it's for ourselves. I planted raspberry bushes and pear and plum and nut trees when I first moved in, which are now bearing fruit. We still harvest currants from Eva's bushes that Katie turns into jam. Katie cans pickles, dilly beans, tomato sauce, and salsa, just as Eva did. Eva died at age 95. I'm so glad I had those couple of years with her to become good friends with her. When I found out about the funeral rentals, I knew what I had to do. I had to do something at my home, our home, for her. I reached out to her daughters and suggested Eva's family and friends come to the house after the wake. We would be having homemade apple pie, Eva's favorite, with friends and family.
You tilled the earth, planted the fields. You made your friends home-cooked meals. You sowed the grass and harvested hay. Served up your switcher on a hot summer's day. You're getting older and your body's worn. message I send. Calmly rest, my new old friend. Calmly rest, my new old friend. You hung the buckets, tapped all the trees. You teamed the horses, you made all the leaves. You cut the wood the old-fashioned way. You boiled the sap on a warm spring day. You're getting older and your body's warm. Gave up the house where you were born. It's in good hands now. This message I send. Calmly rest, my new old friend. Calmly rest, my new old friend. Life was hard, but you had time for fun. You sang and danced with a setting sun. Up at dawn, you put food away, warmed by the stove on a cold autumn day. Now I'm up before sunrise, cup of coffee out the door. I work this land as you did before. It's in good hands now. This message I send. Calmly rest, my new old friend. Calmly rest, my new old friend.
That we should have seen yesterday. I think it's a story that I had problems with yesterday. It was way Lizzie's beautiful voice. So we're gonna do change course a little bit in the tone here. I wanted to introduce my two friends here. Pat. Hello. Pat Allen from Westford, and you're gonna hear about him today. He's also Steel Pass Pat. You're gonna hear in this coming story. And Kevin at Desert Fox today here. So glad they came.
This isn't the Barney's story, is it?
We don't want you to get a divorce here, Pat. Saline Skies, Death Valley, California. Brandon asks, does anyone want to come to town with me to get the tire fixed? There was an awkward silence of several seconds. I'm in, I said. Pat and Kevin opted to sit in the camp chairs at the base of the Eureka Dunes and sip the remnants of our coffee supply, rest and savor the landscape. The closest town was Big Pine, California, nearly 70 miles each way. The trip out to run this errand and resupplying on critical beverages like coffee and beer would involve driving across some of the most brutal desert in the country, climbing a mountain pass, and descending into the valley bottom to Big Pine. Brandon and I set out north and then west from our campsite at Eureka Dunes, riding on our spare tire donut in the Pathfinder rental. Our tire had become victim of the bony road and jagged rocks on the pass into the dunes. We had our fingers crossed we wouldn't hit any sharp rocks, a frequent occurrence in this park. We were already violating several rental car rules by taking the rental car to Death Valley.
That was
And we would test the Pathfinder's abilities to the extreme in the coming days. We both felt a sense of liberation as we headed into the unknown landscape, crossing over the Inyo Mountains divides and its treeless, snow-covered mountaintop beauty, and descending into the valley below. Goosebumps dotted my forearms at the first sight of the quaint town of Big Pine in the distance, embraced by the all-surrounding Sierra Nevada mountains, abruptly rising from the valley flats, making the Inyo Mountains seem like foothills. It was raw and majestic at the same time. It felt inviting. I thought, I could live here. We found a car repair shop with friendly mechanics to plug our flat tire and engage in some small talk. They seemed curious about our stay in Death Valley. We were anxious to pick their brains about a mythical, desolate valley south of the Eureka Dunes called Saline Valley. Brendan had felt pulled to the large hole in this 3 million plus acre park with no tourist amenities noted. He was intrigued by both its size and what the map did not show, the unknown that could await us. It was said to be accessible only by unmaintained desert roads, one from the north, one from the south, and one coming from Eureka Dunes. The road from the north was closed because of snow this time of year. Most visitors would be arriving from the south road. On our map, Steel Pass Road looked like the most direct route for us to take, at least as the crow flies. When we asked the mechanics about this mysterious and legendary place, they both smirked and asked, "Oh, you mean the springs where the naked hippies hang out with the rattlesnakes?" Brandon and I exchanged glances, our interest piqued. This was the birth of our Zen travel guidance and directed us for the remainder of the trip. A divine directive had been bestowed upon us, albeit an oblique one. The local residents seemed a bit intimidated by the rumors of hard-to-reach land inhabited by LA hippies and held no interest in them. The mysterious hot springs information was all secondhand from folks passing by. Brandon and I felt like something in us both begun to shift on the inside as we embarked on becoming one with our surroundings and ourselves. On our drive back to our friends at Eureka Dunes site, Brandon and I began to imagine scenes of hot springs, hippies, and rattlers, and those locals in Big Pine had joked about, and the mystic lore of that place and its people. We were at an important crossroads for the next and last phase of the trip. We had previously had some group discussions about where we would head after our planned portion of the trip, but no final decisions had been made. We intentionally left space in our itinerary for unplanned activities, to be open to possibilities, so we wouldn't be locked in. We wanted the freedom to pivot based on what we were seeing on the ground, what we were feeling in the moment. Some of our options included hiking in the nearby Sierra Nevada mountains, or perhaps checking out Joshua Tree National Park, which was relatively close by. But Brandon and I were thoroughly enticed by the hot springs lure. We agreed we would tempt Paddock Heaven. We later came up with a phrase for that first leg of our stay in Death Valley National Park. Death, the tourist zone of the park. For the second leg of the trip, we wanted to bypass the trappings of Death Valley's more popular sites and get into the backcountry areas and the more remote sections within the park, which we dubbed Deeper Death. We camped in some of the wilder parts and unofficial camping areas, or as we like to say, bootleg camped, near the Natural Bridge Trail and Eureka Dunes. The potential excursion into Saline Valley would mean journeying into the complete unknown. going to where we described as deepest death. If we could convince Pat and Kevin, we would transition from death to deepest death. Our descriptions of the death categories started as a rather obvious joke as we progressed into the various landscapes of this national park with that very name. But later these phrases began to be associated with us going deeper within ourselves. It is said people feel most alive when closest to death. Awake we would become indeed. Just as we crossed the Inyo Mountains, we had the urge to pull over and get out on the side of the desolate back road returning us to Death Valley and the Eureka Dunes. I stood in the middle of the sun-beaten asphalt road, dividing the dull brown mesquite and creosote scrub on either side, with a backdrop of the snow-covered Inyo Mountains behind me. I raised both arms up high as if I were embracing my surroundings with all I could muster inside me. I strode over to the parked SUV as Brandon handed me a beer and a cigar. I hopped on the hood of the SUV, opened the beer, and lit the cigar. A sensation of pure bliss filled me. We were overcome by the music and the magnificent settings. We kept the car windows open so we could continue to hear the music. We were overwhelmed with a feeling of awe and awareness. Any pre-trip stress lingering within us had been released as we embraced the breathtaking blue sky and mountain ranges stretched as far as our eyes could see. That moment we later described as going over the Inyo. It resulted from flat tire magic. Brandon proclaimed my trip nickname Big Pine. 18 years later, he still calls me that. Today, we call any synchronistic events flat tire magic, and we continue to describe our consciousness shifts resulting in moments of bliss as going over the Inyo. Brandon and I screamed back into camp, driving the SUV at reckless speeds, hooting out the windows as Pat and Kevin jumped to their feet. We shared our Big Pine town tale and spoke in glowing tones about the adventures that might be ours in Saline Valley Hot Springs. It took some convincing, but Pat and Kevin agreed we should attempt the journey through Steel Pass and the glory awaiting on the other side, deepest death. We packed up our camp, loaded our gear, and began our next adventure. Although the distance as the crow flies from Eureka to Saline Valley Hot Springs was relatively short, the road could better be described as a goat path. After a few uneventful miles, we slowed to a crawl and realized that one of us needed to walk in front of the car to direct the driver. The three of us took turns warning our driver, Pat, with hand signals, expressive faces, and sometimes frantic voices of all the obstacles and pitfalls that posed danger to us. There were only inches to spare, side to side, among the narrow canyon walls. We later labeled this the birth canal. Many threats lurked below, threatening to smash the car's oil pan as large random boulders lay strewn along the road. Those few dozen miles took nearly 5 hours to complete. Pat was focused and determined to make it through. It was here he earned his trip nickname, Steel Pass Pat. Since we approached Steel Pass from the less traveled north, we encountered the most remote and undeveloped set of hot springs first. The four of us explored the undeveloped hot spring. There were 2 small pools less than 10 feet long and 3 feet deep, surrounded by overhanging desert grass and shrubs. We slid into the welcoming waters for a soothing soak, our bodies beginning to relax after the nail-biting trip. We once again packed up our campsite and continued south on Steel Pass Road. After a short drive, we arrived at the more developed lower hot spring. These springs were larger and surrounded by tall palm trees, creosote bush, desert holly, mesquite, and the seemingly out-of-place manicured lush lawn. The springs themselves were built of desert rock concrete, and their temperatures were regulated by underground pipes so the water wasn't too hot. We were welcomed by one of the hot springs regulars, Brad, who was sitting in a camp chair on the putting green-like lawn, playing his guitar and singing, buck naked. Our hot springs host, Brad, introduced us to his good buddy, Jeff. They were both shocked and deeply impressed when they learned we had arrived to the hot springs from Steel Pass. It was extremely rare for visitors to come by that route. The narrow, boulder-strewn road was prone to flash flooding, even in the desert environment, causing road washouts. Steel Pass was the more fraught of the three possible roads in, and our choice earned us a hero's welcome. Brad and Jeff insisted we stay overnight. They told us not to worry about food or beverages, at least for another day. We had not planned on camping at these hot springs. We intended to only spend the day relaxing before continuing south. Despite our stop in Big Pine a couple days prior, we were once again running low on food and, more importantly, beer. Brad and Jeff began pulling out cheese, bread, smoked sausage, and beer to share with us. They just spread the food on the folding table with no plates, utensils, or napkins. Pat, Kevin, Brandon, and I looked at each other and decided we could not decline this generous offer to spend more time in this melding of a natural and man-made desert oasis. After our barbarian buffet, Brandon mysteriously retreated in his tent while Pat, Kevin, and I were invited into the hot springs. This time, our new friends and their camping neighbors soaked in the nude and invited us to do the same. It was just how things were done there. So the rumors from the mechanics in Big Pine were true. Naked hippies. We soaked in the hot springs once again the following morning with Brad and Jeff. Pat served coffee to the group as we bathed, all in the nude, including Pat. As we packed up and moved on, we said goodbye to the hot springs community, and they encouraged us to come visit again. Our hosts invited us to their annual nude softball game on President's Day weekend, pitting two different hot springs communities against each other. That visual lingered in my mind. We continued heading south from the hot springs, stumbling upon an abandoned historic salt mine along the way. We felt the need to stop at the mine and process what had occurred in Saline Valley and express our gratitude before we left Death Valley. Brandon shared with us why he was squirreled away in his tent that afternoon before. Everything felt different, surreal, and otherworldly. It felt like he walked through a portal and Saline Valley was like a parallel universe. Brandon passionately described the significant influence he felt once we entered deepest death. He was struck in his soul by the landscape and the people we encountered and realized his epiphany. He shared with us an encounter he had in his youth when he met a stranger on a train in Colorado named Kevin Palmer. That experience resonated with him again on this trip. In Kevin Palmer's long conversation with Brandon, he shared his lifelong philosophy of not being burdened by the blinders of planning, being open to all possibilities, following signals and leads, and drifting into the unknown. Although he had dabbled in drifting before, Brandon's heeding of this stranger's guidance was fully realized 2 decades later on this trip. It would continue to hold sway on subsequent trips and adventures that followed. It was the birth of what we now call Zen travel, or what happened to us collectively, especially in the deepest death phase of the trip. Henceforth, we would follow leads into the unknown, pay attention, and be open to the guidance. At different points along the trip, we were struck by a shift in perspective, each coming away with new life epiphanies. Pat was about to become a dad for the first time, and he realized he needed to free himself of his stressful, toxic, and unfulfilling job so he could focus on his new family. He'd be applying for a new job within the same company, but doing more of what he loved. His fearless leadership in getting us through Steel Pass would give him the courage to make his job transition after the spark was lit. Within 4 months after returning home from the trip, Pat changed jobs and became a dad. Kevin, the Desert Fox, was motivated to take off for a year from his carpentry job to focus on making an album of his songs and trying to make a full-time living as a singer-songwriter. Kevin also decided to end an unhappy and unfulfilling dating cycle he was in. A few months after our trip ended his relationship at the time. In the wake of this breakup, I encouraged Kevin to ask Treese out. They had met a few months before, and Kevin seemed smitten. Kevin and Treese started dating shortly thereafter, and the rest is history, as they are now happily married and have 2 beautiful daughters. Soon after the trip, he began work on his second album and fully focused on performing his music full-time. My moment of deep bliss and affection for the tiny town of Big Pine cleared my everyday consciousness and allowed me to acknowledge how much I craved more presence and peace in my life. I confirmed my pre-trip inclination that I needed to end my unhappy and ever-confrontational marriage, but do so in an amicable way. When I arrived home, I asked my then-wife, let's call her Sarah, to go for a walk in the woods. As gently as possible, I expressed, I can't do this any longer. And surprisingly, she agreed. We separated immediately and calmly. I felt completely unburdened and relieved despite the marital failure. A few months after the trip, I proclaimed to myself and my close friends that this summer would be the summer of infinite possibilities. I would be open in Zen fashion to whatever options might unfold. I would drift without plans, not necessarily in traveling, but how I approached my life in each moment. I attended music festivals and concerts with my friends, camped, paddled, and hiked. In August of that year, 2008, at the height of that summer's events, the infinite proclamation was reaffirmed. In astrological cycles, 0808 is a symbol of infinity and carries with it profound spiritual significance. It can represent new beginnings and infinite potential. That summer, and particularly the month of August, was the zenith of my personal freedom. I basked in the glory of late summer warmth, roamed unconstrained and unburdened. It was if my going over the annual moment of bliss and consciousness shift on the hood of the rental car on the way back from Big Pine lingered in me like an aura. I was finally liberated in my happy place. The abandoned salt mine pit stop ended with the 4 of us expressing our gratitude to the universe, to the life-changing events and motivations that engulfed us individually and collectively. We sprinkled our tobacco offering of gratitude each way to the goddesses of the north, south, east, and west. We jumped back into the car and headed west. We would day hike at the base of Mount Whitney in the Sierra Nevada on our way to our last destination, a cleansing plunge into the Pacific Ocean. Before we headed back home, each of us carried a new life plan in our pockets, one that would be set in motion in the days and weeks ahead. All thanks to our moments under the umbrella of Saline Skies. There was a lot more to that story. I had to cut it. There's a lot of interesting characters.
I noticed that, Jim.
And a lot more nudity too. Trying to keep it G-rated.
And daggers.
Daggers.
Over steel past the sailing skies. Springs are hard and people kind. I wasn't sure what I might find. Just went to find some peace of mind. I just went to find some peace of mind. Rattle lost and now I'm found. 200 feet beneath the sea, enlightened by epiphany. Nowhere else I'd rather be, a place they call Death Valley, a place they call Death Valley. Over steel past sailing sky, springs are hot and the people kind. I wasn't sure what I might find, just went to find some peace of mind. I just went to find some peace of mind. I just went to find some peace of mind.
Alright,
All right.
I don't know.
Yeah, we thought Lizzie might play a few more songs and
Unrelated to that,
yeah, and to hear some Lizzie's
I'll play a few
beautiful
songs.
voice and music, and then we thought we'd open it up to some questions and conversation with us.
Start with a song called Rain. It's on my new album. It's called Rain, and it's from my experience as a child in New York City, laying on my mom's arm and wanting to stand and listen to a man up on a soapbox yelling and screaming about the end of times and all that we should do to protect ourselves. And, it kind of stuck with me all these years. I can still see him in my mind. His name is Noah now. I named him Noah.
Noah stands in the pouring rain in his overcoat with his wooden cane, preaching on his old soapbox to profess the pain of a life he'd lost before the war, before the tide, before his Lord set him right. Holy shoes beside his feet, he bellows forth across the street. With a spark inside his sunken eyes, he beckons down the darkening skies, and he cries out loud about the coming days, like a thundering cloud before the rain. Rain, rain, falling down, fall upon forsaken ground. Rain, rain, fall on me, bring the flood and set me free. Rain, rain, fall on me. Rain, rain. Sitting where I'm warm and dry, from the coffee shop I meet his eye. The river's running down the glass, he warns me what will come to pass as the waters rise and the cities drown, the old world dies.
first album called Made for Flying. It's fiction. It's inspired by my son and his little friend who was dressed up as Amelia Earhart when they were 3 years old.
Somewhere south of Buffalo, on my daddy's farm, I could hear the biplanes buzzing early in the morning, and I'd watch the sun light the sky. And when I closed my eyes, I could fly 30,000 feet above the world. I see the universe unfurl. Daddy, you don't have to be afraid. Can't you see that I was made for flying? Daddy took me to a show to see the thunderbirds. They dipped and dived and waved their wings as if they could hear my words. And I reached my hands and touched the sky. And when I closed my eyes, I could fly 30,000 feet above the world. I see the universe unfurl. Daddy, you don't have to be afraid. Can't you see that I was made for flying? Made my home near Albertsford, along the open fields. Tested every plane I could, from here to Bakersfield. And on this cloudless night, I do believe when my wings touch the air, that angels breathe. 30,000 feet above the world, I see the universe unfurl. And Daddy, you don't have to be afraid. Can't you see that I was made for flying? I was made for flying.
We're just gonna, if folks have any questions, is Susan's around back? I just wanted to thank Craftsbury Library for hosting us today. Beautiful space. Thank you, Susan. Wherever you are. Well, first, I'm curious what folks thought about the format. This is our first time, we didn't have okay to stay, but, the readings with the music.
It's wonderful.
Good.
It's enhanced it even more.
Good.
Anybody have any questions or comments? Yes.
I wanna know when you're gonna open to Noah Khan. Seriously. Both of you should.
That's an interesting.
Should we give them a call or?
Show up at the store and grab
And Lizzie has, her CDs in the back there for sale today.
Jim, I thought it was lovely to start with something that we could relate to because we know the area that you're talking about. And to have it both be in music and through your words, I thought was really lovely. And then to do something entirely different with your trip to Death Valley.
Yeah.
Just gave greater insights into who you are and who you hang around with.
Amazing trip, despite the characters I hang out with. There are a lot of other crazy stories in there too.
Well, so tell us about the rattlesnakes.
Yeah.
There was a rattlesnake story. I had to cut out a bunch of what I read, but that's why I was kind of flipping back and forth.
That's why you have to purchase the book. So you know what happened.
Yeah, Brandon's epiphany, I kind of cut some of his epiphany. We were camping early in the morning. He had a nature's call, and he was finding a spot to visit, have his nature's call, and he had a voice in his head that said, snake. And just as that voice in his head said snake, he looked down and realized he was almost going to step on a rattler.
Oh.
And he later thought that it was the snake warning him not to step on him. So that was the rattler in the book, and Brandon's trip nickname was Diamondback after that. There were a lot of crazy characters in there, and these guys refer to one named Jayananda, that we met at the first hot spring, the more remote hot spring, and she carried with her a foot-long machete in the back of her pants, and she had this chic-like wardrobe on, and when we asked her what her name was, she said, "You can call me, go fuck yourself." No children. So and then we befriended her, and we wound up having a group meditation with her later on in the trip.
Yeah, right.
As soon as that portal opened, the crazy happened, and it was a fantastic trip. Any other thoughts or comments? Or if not,
So Jim, it seems like the woman whose farm you're now working, it's almost like one of David Budville's characters. Did you find that sort of connection when you?
yeah, they were in his book. It's obviously changing the names, and Rob here, our neighbor, may know a little bit more than I as far as, but that's our farm, the setting, the mountain, Judavine,
Yeah.
the ledges, mountain, the swamp. Those are all throughout his books, and obviously the Judavine book, and the spruce. Goes on Spruce Mountain. Bones on, yes. Yes. Got that name wrong, but yeah, so it's kind of like all of it's in that setting. A lot of interesting characters in Wolcott, especially back in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of tales to tell.
Yeah.
Alright. Well, thank you. Oh, Sure.
This is more of a comment, and picking up on what you just said. The fact that you captured a piece of Vermont that those of us who, you know, who many generations have grown up and lived here our whole lives, and I worry about it. I worry that it's fading and that people don't recognize its importance and the legacy, and that you wrote so well and so lovingly about it. How do you make others aware, doing events like this, but how do you make other people aware of the importance of the legacy that you've shared through your book?
I get a lot of stories actually from Rob's dad, is a great storyteller, Walt, and there's that verbal history that's handed down, and I'm concerned as well that we're losing that history as that generation starts to slowly leave us, and I'm not sure what the answer is, but this was my shot at trying to save it. But I hope others will do the same, and we have libraries and other storytellers and other books that are out there. And hopefully we can continue it. Yeah. All right. Well, we have some Katie's delicious home baked cookies and drinks in the back, and there are CDs or books back there.
The cover picture.
Oh, that's up the view off of our back porch.
I know, but this cloud has a face in it.
Oh.
I don't know if you ever noticed that, Jim, but you're like, it's kind of like the man you speak of, your grandfather.
Oh, wow.
It is a face. Wow.
And then so that's the view from our back porch. We have a.
I was wondering if it got altered or what.
We have a big event called Swamp Fest every year, and that was the Swamp Fest party. We invite all the neighbors to, and it was during when the Canadian wildfires, so that had a beautiful color to it. And there's another picture in the end of the book in the epilogue of the Northern Lights. It was that last January, and it was the night I found out a good friend of mine passed away, but there was a face in the Northern Lights. In there too. I don't want to read any more sad stories. Well, thank you everybody again for coming.
I've heard that.